Real alien invasion stories to give you goosebumps. The night air was thick with an unnatural stillness as I stood in my backyard watching the impossible unfold before my eyes. What started as routine stargazing would forever change how I see the world around us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because what happened that October evening was just the first of many encounters that would make me question everything I thought I knew about our place in the universe. I'd been an amateur astronomer for over 15 years, documenting celestial events and tracking satellite movements with the methodical precision of someone who finds comfort in predictable patterns. My small observatory setup wasn't anything fancy, just a decent telescope and some basic recording equipment positioned in the corner of my property where light pollution was minimal. On clear nights, I'd spend hours cataloging observations, sketching constellation positions, and occasionally catching the trail of a meteor or the steady progression of the International Space Station. That particular evening started like countless others. The October sky was crisp and clear, perfect conditions for deep space observation. I'd been tracking Jupiter's moons when something caught my attention in my peripheral vision. At first, I dismissed it as an aircraft or satellite. But as I turned my telescope toward the disturbance, what I saw defied every logical explanation I could muster. 3 perfectly spherical objects hung motionless in the sky, arranged in a precise triangular formation about 2,000 feet above my neighborhood. They weren't reflecting light like conventional aircraft, nor did they emit the familiar red and green navigation lights required by aviation regulations. Instead, they seemed to absorb the ambient light around them, creating areas of darkness against the star field that my eyes struggled to process. The objects appeared to be roughly 30 feet in diameter, though judging distance and size in the night sky is notoriously difficult. I grabbed my camera and began recording, my hands trembling slightly as I adjusted the focus. Through the viewfinder, the objects maintained their perfect formation, completely motionless despite a steady breeze that was moving clouds across the sky. No sound reached my ears. No engine noise or rotor wash that would indicate conventional aircraft. The silence was so complete it felt oppressive, as if the very air around these objects had been muted. After observing for nearly 10 minutes, the formation began to move. Not the gradual acceleration you'd expect from any known aircraft, but an instantaneous shift from complete stillness to purposeful motion. The 3 objects maintained their triangular arrangement as they glided silently across the sky, their movement so smooth it seemed to defy the laws of physics. They covered what I estimated to be several miles in just seconds, yet there was no sonic boom, no disturbance in the air whatsoever. As I watched through my telescope, one of the objects separated from the formation and began descending toward my location. My rational mind screamed at me to go inside, to seek shelter, but I remained frozen in place, compelled to witness whatever was about to unfold. The object stopped its descent approximately 500 feet directly above my property, hovering with the same impossible stillness I'd observed earlier. That's when the communication began. I use that word carefully, because what happened next wasn't communication in any conventional sense. There were no lights flashing in patterns, no radio transmissions, no visible attempts at contact. Instead, I felt a presence pressing against the edges of my consciousness, like someone gently knocking on a door I didn't know existed. The sensation was both terrifying and oddly comforting, as if something vast and ancient was trying to make itself known without causing harm. Images began forming in my mind, not as thoughts but as direct experiences. I saw vast distances of space, star systems I didn't recognize, and worlds that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. He witnessed civilizations that had risen and fallen across eons, technologies that operated on principles completely foreign to human understanding. Through it all, there was a sense of urgency, as if these beings were trying to convey something critically important about our world's future. The most vivid image was of Earth itself, but not as I'd ever seen it before. Our planet appeared to be connected to other worlds through streams of energy or information, part of some vast network that spanned galaxies. I saw human civilization as just one small part of a much larger tapestry, one that was approaching a crucial transition point. The implications were staggering, suggesting that our species was being observed and perhaps guided by intelligences far beyond our current comprehension. As suddenly as it had begun, the connection ended. The object above my property rose silently and rejoined its companions, who had waited motionless throughout the entire encounter. The formation resumed its original configuration and accelerated away, disappearing beyond the horizon in mere seconds. I was left standing in my backyard, camera still recording, trying to process what had just occurred. The footage I captured that night would become the foundation for everything that followed. When I reviewed the recording, I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. The timestamp showed that what felt like 10 or 15 minutes of observation had actually lasted nearly 2 hours. Somehow, my perception of time had been altered during the encounter, leaving me with no memory of the missing period except for those vivid images that had been implanted in my consciousness. I spent weeks analyzing the footage, enhancing the images and comparing them against known aircraft and atmospheric phenomena. Nothing in my research could explain what I had witnessed. The objects displayed flight characteristics that violated fundamental principles of aerodynamics and physics. They accelerated without visible propulsion systems, maintained perfect formation without any apparent communication between units, and moved with a precision that suggested technological capabilities far beyond human achievement. More disturbing than the technical impossibilities was the growing realization that this encounter was not an isolated incident. As I began researching similar sightings, I discovered a pattern of reports stretching back decades, all describing objects with remarkably similar characteristics. Witnesses from around the world had reported the same triangular formations, the same impossible flight patterns, and most unsettling of all, the same type of mental contact I had experienced. The beings behind these craft seemed to be conducting some form of systematic observation of human civilization, appearing at crucial moments in our history and making contact with individuals across all walks of life. Farmers, pilots, scientists, military personnel, and ordinary citizens had all reported encounters that followed similar patterns. The consistency of these reports suggested either an elaborate global conspiracy or something far more extraordinary, proof that we are not alone in the universe. What became clear through my research was that these encounters were increasing in frequency and intensity. The beings seemed to be preparing for something, building toward some kind of revelation or intervention that would fundamentally change humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. The urgency I had felt during my own encounter was echoed in dozens of other accounts, all describing the same sense that time was running out for some crucial decision or transformation. The psychological impact of this realization cannot be overstated. Everything I thought I knew about reality had been shattered in the span of a single evening. The comfortable boundaries of human knowledge and achievement suddenly seemed pitifully small compared to the vast intelligences that were apparently monitoring our every move. Yet alongside the fear and uncertainty came a strange sense of anticipation, as if I had been chosen to witness the opening chapters of humanity's next great adventure. In the months that followed my initial encounter, I began reaching out to other witnesses, creating a network of individuals who had experienced similar contact events. What we discovered was both terrifying and remarkable. The beings making contact weren't random visitors from distant stars, but part of a coordinated effort to prepare humanity for some kind of transition. Their message, conveyed through the same type of mental communication I had experienced, was consistent across all encounters. Our species was approaching a critical juncture that would determine our future survival and development. The implications of this revelation extend far beyond the mere existence of extraterrestrial life. If these beings are telling the truth, then humanity is about to face challenges that will require us to evolve beyond our current limitations. The petty conflicts and divisions that dominate our news cycles may soon seem insignificant compared to the cosmic responsibilities that await us. We are apparently being evaluated, tested to determine whether our species possesses the wisdom and unity necessary to join a larger galactic community. As I share this account, I'm acutely aware of how it sounds to those who haven't experienced direct contact themselves. The rational, scientific part of my mind still struggles to accept what I witnessed, despite the overwhelming evidence, but the footage doesn't lie, and neither do the dozens of other witnesses who have shared remarkably similar experiences. Something unprecedented is happening in our skies, and it's accelerating toward a conclusion that none of us can fully predict. The question that haunts me every day is whether humanity is ready for what's coming. Our species has achieved remarkable technological progress, but we remain divided by conflicts that may seem trivial to beings capable of crossing interstellar distances. If we are indeed being prepared for contact with a larger galactic civilization, then our success or failure in that transition may depend on our ability to transcend the limitations that have defined human society throughout recorded history. Tonight, as I write these words, I can't help but look up at the stars with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between worlds, intelligences beyond our comprehension are watching and waiting. They have made contact with hundreds, perhaps thousands of us, sharing glimpses of a future that will either elevate humanity to unimaginable heights or serve as a final test of our worthiness to survive. The invasion has already begun, but not in the way science fiction has taught us to expect. There are no massive ships destroying cities, no laser weapons cutting through our defenses. Instead, there is patient observation, careful contact, and a gradual preparation for changes that will reshape everything we think we know about our place in the universe. The only question that remains is whether we will be ready when the time comes to step forward into that larger reality, or whether we will fail the test that may determine the fate of our entire species. The morning after my encounter with those three spherical objects, I tried to convince myself it had all been some kind of elaborate dream. But when I checked my telescope's tracking system, there it was, a gap in the recorded data spanning exactly 47 minutes. The same 47 minutes I'd spent in that otherworldly communion. I wasn't the only one experiencing these gaps in time. Dr. Sarah Chen, a physicist at the nearby university, contacted me 3 days later. She'd heard about my sighting through local astronomy circles and wanted to share something disturbing. Her laboratory's atomic clocks had registered the same temporal anomaly, a synchronized pause across multiple precision instruments that should have been impossible. "It's as if time itself hiccuped," she explained during our coffee meeting, but only in a localized area covering roughly 30 square miles. Your neighborhood sits right at the center. The implication sent chills down my spine. Whatever had visited me hadn't just been observing. It had been manipulating the fundamental fabric of reality itself. Over the following weeks, more people came forward. A truck driver named Marcus reported his GPS going haywire for exactly 47 minutes while passing through our area. A local emergency dispatcher noticed a strange silence on all radio frequencies during that same time frame. Even the automatic weather station had stopped recording data. But the most unsettling discovery came from Dr. Chen's continued research. She'd been analyzing satellite imagery from that night and found something that made my blood run cold. The electromagnetic signature she detected wasn't random. It was a pattern, a complex mathematical sequence that seemed to be communicating. "It's like a digital fingerprint," she said, pulling up the data on her laptop. "And here's the thing. This exact same pattern has appeared at 47 other locations worldwide in the past 6 months, always lasting exactly 47 minutes, always accompanied by reports of unusual aerial phenomena." The number 47 kept appearing everywhere we looked. It wasn't coincidence. It was intentional. They were marking their presence, leaving breadcrumbs for those intelligent enough to follow. I began reaching out to other amateur astronomers, posting carefully worded messages on forums and contacting observatories. The responses that trickled back painted a picture that was both fascinating and terrifying. A pattern of contact was emerging, but it wasn't random. They were selecting specific individuals: scientists, educators, communicators, people who could process what they were seeing and share it with others. Dr. James Morrison, a radio astronomer from Arizona, had recorded 47 minutes of structured signals from deep space. Dr. Lisa Park in Seoul had documented 47 minutes of unexplained atmospheric ionization. Each event corresponded with personal contact experiences remarkably similar to mine. The most disturbing revelation came from Dr. Angela Rodriguez, a neuroscientist studying consciousness. She'd been monitoring her own brain activity during meditation when the same electromagnetic pattern Dr. Chen detected appeared in her neural recordings. For 47 minutes, her brain waves had synchronized with something external. "It's as if they're not just observing us," she told me during a video call. "They're integrating with us, testing our cognitive capabilities, our emotional responses, our capacity for understanding concepts beyond our current scientific framework." This wasn't invasion in any traditional sense, it was recruitment. The evidence suggested a sophisticated selection process spanning the globe. They were identifying humans capable of processing advanced concepts, individuals who could serve as bridges between species. But bridges for what purpose? The answer came during my second encounter. It happened exactly 47 days after the first contact. I'd been expecting it, had even set up additional recording equipment in my backyard. This time, I was ready. The objects appeared at precisely 11:23 p.m., emerging from the same constellation as before. But instead of 3 craft, there were dozens. A vast formation stretching across the night sky like a fleet preparing for something momentous. The mental connection was immediate and overwhelming. Images flooded my consciousness, but these weren't the gentle exploratory communications of our first meeting. These were urgent, almost desperate transmissions. I saw Earth from space, but not as it is today. The planet was wounded, massive storms ravaging the continents, oceans rising to swallow coastal cities, vast dead zones where nothing could survive. But this wasn't a prediction of some distant future. According to the timescale they shared, this was less than 20 years away. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. They weren't here to invade or conquer. They were here to help. The gradual contact, the careful selection of individuals, the patient observation. It was all preparation for an intervention that Earth desperately needed. But they couldn't act without permission. Some cosmic protocol, some universal law, prevented them from interfering with a developing species without consent. They needed advocates, humans who understood the stakes and could help prepare our species for what was coming. The images shifted, showing me glimpses of other worlds they'd helped before. Civilizations that had faced similar crises and emerged transformed, elevated beyond their previous limitations, But I also saw worlds that had refused help, planets now lifeless and cold, their populations having chosen isolation over survival. The choice, they made clear, was ours. But time was running out. As the connection deepened, I began to understand the scope of their network. Thousands of species across the galaxy, all interconnected, all working together to preserve and nurture developing civilizations. It was a vast galactic community based on cooperation, shared knowledge, and mutual support. They were offering us membership, but only if we could evolve beyond our current limitations. The communication session lasted exactly 47 minutes, ending as abruptly as it had begun. But this time, they left something behind. A device, small and crystalline, that materialized on my telescope's mount as the craft departed. Dr. Chen's analysis of the device revealed technology centuries beyond our current understanding. It seemed to be a communication node, capable of establishing direct contact with their network, but it remained inactive, waiting for something. Perhaps a critical mass of human understanding or a global recognition of our situation. In the days that followed, I learned I wasn't the only one who'd received such a device. The other contactees around the world reported similar gifts, all apparently linked in some way. We were being prepared for something larger, something that would require coordinated action. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't a traditional invasion because invasion implies conquest. What we were experiencing was more like recruitment. They were building a network of human allies, individuals who could help bridge the gap between species and prepare our civilization for the challenges ahead. But the more I learned, the more urgent the situation became. The environmental collapse they'd shown me wasn't some distant possibility. It was already beginning. The increasingly extreme weather, the ecosystem disruptions, the social instability, these were early warning signs of a cascade failure that would accelerate rapidly. They had the technology to help, the knowledge to guide us through the transition. But they needed our consent, our cooperation, and time was running out for humanity to make that choice. The invasion, if you could call it that, wasn't happening with ships and weapons. It was happening through understanding, through gradual revelation, through the slow recognition that we weren't alone, and that our survival might depend on accepting help from those who had walked this path before. The question that kept me awake at night wasn't whether they were real. The evidence was overwhelming. The question was whether humanity would be wise enough to accept the help we so desperately needed, or whether we'd choose pride and isolation over survival and transformation. As I sit here now, watching the device pulse with faint rhythmic light, I realize that we're living through the most important moment in human history. The invasion is real, but it's not what we expected. It's an invitation to something greater, a chance to join a community we never knew existed. The only question is whether we'll be ready to say yes before it's too late. Part 3. The Depths of Contact. The patterns weren't random. After weeks of documenting the encounters, cross-referencing testimonies from around the globe, something undeniable emerged from the data. The beings weren't just visiting, they were preparing us. Dr. Sarah Chen had been studying atmospheric anomalies for the National Weather Service when the report started flooding in. Strange lights, impossible aircraft movements, electromagnetic disturbances that defied conventional explanation. What began as routine meteorological investigation became something far more profound. The electromagnetic signatures were consistent, she later testified before a closed congressional hearing. Whatever these objects were, they were scanning our infrastructure, power grids, communication networks, military installations, but not in a way that suggested hostile intent, more like mapping, understanding how our systems worked. The revelation came through a pattern recognition algorithm designed to track weather systems. When Chen fed the UFO sighting data into the same program, the results were startling. The objects moved in deliberate patterns, creating a grid-like network across the planet. Each sighting corresponded to a node in what appeared to be a massive surveillance and communication system. But surveillance for what purpose? The answer came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb had been stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base when the incidents began. Nuclear facilities worldwide reported similar phenomena. Unidentified objects hovered over missile silos, temporarily disabling weapons systems, then departed without causing permanent damage. They could have destroyed everything, Webb recalled, his voice still carrying the weight of that realization. Instead, they just turned things off. Like they were demonstrating their capabilities without causing harm. It was a message. The message became clearer when researchers noticed the timing. Every major nuclear facility on Earth experienced these visits within a 72-hour window. The coordination required was staggering. This wasn't random contact. It was orchestrated, planned, deliberate. Dr. Raj Patel, a quantum physicist at CERN, provided another piece of the puzzle. The Large Hadron Collider had detected unusual particle signatures during the same time frame as the nuclear facility incidents. Exotic matter that shouldn't exist, according to known physics, appeared in brief bursts that corresponded exactly with UFO sightings worldwide. The implications were profound, Patel explained. These signatures suggested technology that could manipulate space-time itself. Wormholes, dimensional rifts, faster-than-light travel. We were witnessing physics that our civilization won't achieve for centuries, if ever. The encounters weren't limited to military and scientific installations. Civilian reports poured in from every continent, but these weren't the stereotypical abduction stories of popular culture. These were different, subtler, more meaningful. Maria Santos, a nurse from São Paulo, described her encounter while working a night shift at a children's hospital. I was checking on patients when the lights started flickering, but not randomly. They pulsed in a pattern. One pulse, then three, then one, then three. It took me a moment to realize it was Morse code. The message spelled out coordinates that led to a remote area outside the city where Maria found herself drawn the following evening. She wasn't alone. 17 other people had received similar messages through various means: lights, radio static, even patterns in cloud formations. What they found changed everything. The gathering wasn't dramatic. No massive spacecraft, no little green men. Instead, they encountered something far more profound: a presence, a consciousness that communicated not through words, but through direct understanding. Images, emotions, concepts flowed into their minds with crystalline clarity. The message was simple, yet earth-shattering. Earth was approaching a critical juncture. Climate change, nuclear proliferation, social upheaval. Humanity stood at a crossroads between evolution and extinction. The visitors weren't invaders. They were gardeners, tending to a species on the verge of either transcendence or collapse. Similar gatherings occurred worldwide, always small groups, always people who worked in essential services. Healthcare workers, teachers, engineers, farmers. The beings were selecting individuals who understood systems, who kept civilization functioning at its most basic levels. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a marine biologist studying coral reef degradation, found herself aboard what could only be described as a spacecraft, but calling it a ship seemed inadequate. It was more like a living entity, walls that breathed, surfaces that responded to thought. They showed me the oceans, she recalled, tears still fresh in her eyes years later. Not just Earth's oceans, but oceans on worlds across the galaxy. I saw the patterns, how civilizations rise and fall based on their relationship with their environment. We are not the first species to face this choice. The beings, she learned, were part of a vast network of civilizations that had successfully navigated the transition from planetary to galactic consciousness. They called themselves gardeners, tending to younger species the way humans might tend to endangered wildlife. But there was a catch. The help couldn't be forced. It had to be chosen. Free will was apparently a fundamental law. Even advanced civilizations couldn't violate. Humanity had to want to evolve, had to actively choose cooperation over conflict, sustainability over exploitation, unity over division. The evidence was mounting that contact had been ongoing for decades, perhaps centuries. Ancient cave paintings depicting strange aerial phenomena, medieval accounts of heavenly hosts moving in impossible ways, Native American traditions speaking of star people who would return during times of great change. But something had accelerated in recent years. The urgency was palpable in every encounter, every message, every demonstration of advanced technology. Time was running out. Dr. James Morrison, a climatologist at the University of Edinburgh, had been tracking accelerating environmental changes when he was contacted, not through lights or sounds, but through his dreams. Night after night, he found himself in a vast chamber surrounded by beings of light who showed him computer models of Earth's future. The projections were terrifying, Morrison admitted, but they also showed alternative timelines, futures where we made different choices, where we accepted help, where we learned to work together instead of against each other. The technology they offered could solve our energy crisis, reverse climate change, even extend human lifespan indefinitely. The price? Humanity would have to abandon its warlike nature. Nuclear weapons would have to be dismantled. Resources would need to be shared globally. National boundaries would become obsolete as the species learned to think as one organism rather than competing tribes. It seemed impossible. Human nature itself would have to change. But then came the revelations about human nature itself. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a neuroscientist studying consciousness, made a breakthrough that rocked the scientific community. Hidden within human DNA were sequences that didn't appear natural, genetic modifications suggesting someone had been guiding human evolution for millennia. We found what we called sleeper genes, Tanaka explained. Sequences that appeared inactive but were actually waiting for specific environmental triggers. When activated, they enhanced empathy, pattern recognition, cooperative behavior. It was as if someone had been preparing us for this moment. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just being offered help. We had been designed for this transition. The capacity for transcendence was already within us, waiting to be awakened. But awakening required choice. And choice required knowledge, which explained the gradual revelation, the careful contact, the mounting evidence that could no longer be ignored or explained away. The visitors weren't invading Earth. They were graduating their students. The question remained, would humanity pass the test? The signs suggested the final examination was approaching. Strange atmospheric phenomena were increasing. More people reported contact experiences. Government officials whispered about classified briefings that left them pale and shaken. Something was coming, something that would force humanity to choose its path forward once and for all. The gardeners had done their work, planted their seeds, provided their guidance. Now it was time to see what kind of harvest humanity would reap. The encounters continued, each one adding another piece to a puzzle that revealed the most profound truth in human history. We are not alone. We never have been. And our cosmic family has been waiting patiently for us to grow up enough to join them among the stars. But first, We had to prove we deserved a place at the galactic table. The choice, as it had always been, was ours to make. Part 4. The Accelerating Contact. The implications were staggering. Everything we thought we understood about our place in the universe, about our solitude among the stars, was crumbling before our eyes, but the gardeners weren't finished with their revelations. As more people around the world began to experience these encounters, a pattern emerged that would change everything. Dr. Sarah Chen was analyzing satellite data at the SETI Institute when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The electromagnetic signatures weren't random. They were increasing in frequency, following a precise mathematical progression. What had started as isolated incidents was becoming coordinated events happening simultaneously across the globe. "The signals are synchronizing," she whispered to her colleague, staring at the screen that showed energy patterns emerging from 17 different locations worldwide. "It's like they're preparing for something massive." That same night, a commercial pilot named Marcus Rodriguez was flying over the Pacific when his instruments detected what air traffic control couldn't see. 3 triangular craft, each the size of a football field, hovered just beneath the cloud layer. As he watched in stunned silence, beams of light descended from each craft, scanning the ocean's surface in perfect geometric patterns. "They're mapping everything," Marcus later told investigators. "Not just the surface, but somehow reaching deep into the water itself." The light penetrated hundreds of feet down, and I could see structures, things that shouldn't exist on the ocean floor. Meanwhile, in laboratories around the world, scientists were making discoveries that defied explanation. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a geneticist in Barcelona, found herself staring at DNA sequences that appeared overnight in her secure research facility. The genetic code was human, but enhanced with sequences designed to activate dormant regions of the brain associated with empathy and collective consciousness. "Someone or something has been in our lab," she reported to her superiors, but there were no signs of forced entry, no security breaches. The new genetic material was simply there, arranged on my desk with mathematical precision, as if it had been waiting for me to find it. The message was becoming clear. The gardeners weren't just observing anymore. They were actively preparing humanity for something unprecedented. The choice they spoke of was approaching faster than anyone had anticipated. In rural Montana, rancher Jake Sullivan discovered crop circles that weren't circles at all, but complex geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. When he touched the affected wheat, images flooded his mind. Cities transformed by clean energy technologies, deserts blooming with life through atmospheric manipulation, oceans cleaned of pollution by devices that existed only in the visions the gardeners shared. "They're showing us what's possible," Jake told the small crowd that gathered at his farm. "But only if we're willing to work together instead of against each other. The technology they're offering requires cooperation on a global scale. It won't work if we remain divided." The encounters were no longer isolated incidents affecting individuals. Entire communities began reporting shared experiences. In a small town in Japan, every resident dreamed the same dream on the same night. They saw their town 50 years in the future, transformed by technologies that seemed like magic but were grounded in scientific principles beyond current human understanding. The gardener's presence was accelerating, and with each passing day, more evidence emerged that we were approaching a critical threshold. The question was no longer whether contact was real, but whether humanity was ready for what came next. As government officials met in emergency sessions and scientists worked around the clock to understand the implications, one thing became increasingly clear. The gardeners had been patient, but their patience was not infinite. The choice they offered came with a deadline, and that deadline was approaching fast. The next phase of contact would be impossible to deny, impossible to cover up, and would force every person on Earth to confront a reality that would forever change what it means to be human. The signals became impossible to ignore. For weeks, astronomers had been tracking what they called atmospheric anomalies, strange disturbances in the upper atmosphere that defied conventional explanation. Satellites picked up electromagnetic pulses that followed no known pattern. Radio telescopes detected transmissions that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Dr. Sarah Chen was one of the first to recognize what was happening. Working late in her lab at the National Observatory, she noticed something peculiar about the data streaming across her monitors. The signals weren't random interference or cosmic background radiation. They were structured, purposeful, almost like a language trying to emerge from static. "It's not coming from space," she whispered to herself, studying the readings. "It's coming from here, from Earth itself." The realization hit her like a physical blow. These weren't transmissions from distant worlds trying to reach us. They were transmissions from our own planet, broadcasting outward, as if something on Earth was calling home. Meanwhile, in laboratories around the world, scientists were documenting other impossible phenomena. Quantum computers were solving problems they hadn't been programmed to address. Artificial intelligence systems were writing code that their creators couldn't understand. Medical devices were performing functions beyond their original design, healing patients in ways that should have been impossible. The technology wasn't malfunctioning, it was evolving. Dr. Marcus Webb, a neuroscientist in London, discovered that the human brain scans he'd been conducting showed unprecedented activity in regions previously thought dormant. His subjects, all volunteers who claimed to have experienced strange dreams or visions, displayed neural patterns unlike anything in medical literature. "It's as if their minds are being upgraded," he told his colleague during a late-night video call. "Like someone installed new software." That same night, across 6 different continents, children began drawing the same symbol, a complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and move when you looked at it directly. Teachers collected hundreds of these drawings, all identical down to the smallest detail, created by children who had never met and spoke different languages. The symbol appeared on walls, in sand, scratched into tree bark. Always the same, always perfect. Government agencies tried to maintain secrecy, but the evidence was overwhelming. Emergency meetings were called in Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and London. Military officials spoke in hushed tones about biological integration events and technological synthesis protocols, terms that meant nothing to the public but everything to those who understood what was happening. The gardeners weren't coming. They were already here. They had been here all along, woven into our technology, our medicine, our very DNA, the abductions, the implants, the genetic modifications. They hadn't been experiments. They had been preparations. Lieutenant Colonel David Hayes sat in a classified briefing room, reviewing reports that made his hands shake. For 40 years, military personnel had documented encounters with unidentified craft, strange beings, and impossible technology. Now, those reports were being cross-referenced with medical data, technological innovations, and population studies. The pattern was undeniable. Every major breakthrough in human technology over the past decades had been preceded by a wave of UFO sightings. Every leap forward in medicine, computing, or engineering had followed clusters of abduction reports. It wasn't coincidence, it was cultivation. "They've been teaching us," Hayes said to the room full of officials, "slowly, carefully, giving us just enough to advance without overwhelming us. Like parents teaching a child to walk. The question now wasn't whether contact had been made. It was whether humanity was ready for the next phase." Dr. Chen's equipment registered a massive surge in the mysterious signals. Every observatory on Earth detected the same thing, a coordinated transmission powerful enough to reach far beyond our solar system. The message was clear to anyone monitoring the skies. Earth was ready. Within hours, the first responses began arriving. Not from space, but from the technology around us. Every device connected to the internet began displaying the same message in every human language simultaneously. The preparation is complete. Integration begins now. The screens showed technical specifications for technologies that wouldn't be invented for decades, or so humanity had thought. Clean energy systems that could power entire cities, medical treatments that could cure any disease, transportation methods that defied physics. All of it had been waiting, locked away in systems we thought we understood. But the message came with a choice. Accept the gifts and join the galactic community, but accept also the responsibilities that came with advanced technology. Prove that humanity could use these tools for creation rather than destruction. Demonstrate wisdom worthy of the cosmic inheritance being offered. The deadline wasn't negotiable. 47 days, as news of the revelation spread, the world fractured along predictable lines. Some called it the greatest hoax in history. Others proclaimed it humanity's salvation. Religious leaders debated whether these beings were angels or demons. Scientists argued over data that challenged everything they thought they knew about reality. But in quiet laboratories and hospital rooms around the world, the integration continued. People who had been touched by the gardener's influence found themselves changing. Not physically, but mentally. They began to understand concepts that had no words, to see solutions to problems that had plagued humanity for generations. They became bridges between two worlds, human enough to relate to their own species, but enhanced enough to comprehend what was being offered. The gardeners hadn't come to conquer. They had come to invite humanity to join something magnificent, something that spanned galaxies and connected countless civilizations in a web of cooperation and shared knowledge. The choice was ours, but the clock was ticking, and the universe was watching to see what kind of species we truly were. The signals started changing 3 days ago, where before they came in scattered bursts. Now they arrived in coordinated waves that swept across the globe with mathematical precision. Dr. Sarah Chen hadn't slept in 48 hours, her eyes burning as she stared at the cascading data streams that painted an impossible picture of organized communication between dozens of sites worldwide. "It's like watching a symphony," she whispered to her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, who stood beside her in the darkened control room. Every pulse, every frequency shift. They're all timed to complement each other. The Beijing facility was reporting identical patterns. So were the stations in Antarctica, Peru, and the Scottish Highlands. 47 distinct transmission points, all synchronized to the nanosecond, all building toward something that made Sarah's hands shake as she traced the mathematical progressions. The gardeners weren't just talking anymore, they were orchestrating. In a small apartment in Portland, Maya Rodriguez felt the familiar weight settling behind her eyes. But this time was different. The presence that had inhabited her thoughts for months wasn't alone. She could sense others. Hundreds, maybe thousands of minds touching hers across vast distances, all human, all changed in the same fundamental way she had been. "We are the bridge network," the collective voice whispered through her consciousness, "and the time for subtle preparation is ending." Through her augmented perception, Maya could see the threads connecting every modified human on Earth. They formed a living web of consciousness that spanned continents, each node pulsing with shared knowledge and purpose. The gardeners had been building this network for decades, she realized, carefully selecting and preparing individuals who could serve as translators between species. The revelation should have terrified her. Instead, she felt only a profound sense of coming home. 3,000 miles away, former Air Force pilot Jack Morrison stood in his kitchen, watching his coffee mug vibrate against the counter as subsonic frequencies pulsed through the Earth itself. His radio equipment, which he'd kept active since his encounter over the Nevada desert, suddenly erupted with activity. Not the usual random static, but organized transmissions in languages that human throats couldn't pronounce. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. "The time for hiding is over. Coordinates attached. Come if you're ready for answers." Similar messages were being sent to thousands of witnesses worldwide. The photographer who'd captured impossible lights over the Amazon, the geologist who'd found the resonating artifact, the family whose electronic devices had malfunctioned during a camping trip. Every person who'd encountered the gardener's subtle influence was receiving the same invitation. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist who'd studied the transformed forest ecosystem, felt the pull as well. The trees around her research station had begun exhibiting new behaviors, their bioluminescent patterns growing brighter, more complex, almost urgent. The symbiotic organisms living within their bark were producing chemical signatures that her instruments could detect but not decode. It was a countdown, she realized. The forest itself was marking time. The gardener's strategy was becoming clear to those who could perceive the full scope of their activity. For decades, they had worked in the shadows, making contact with individuals, seeding technology, gradually preparing humanity for a transition that most people couldn't yet comprehend. They had enhanced human capabilities where possible, established communication networks, and demonstrated their presence to those who were ready to accept it. But the window for gentle preparation was closing. Climate data showed accelerating collapse. Political tensions were reaching critical mass. The same short-sighted thinking that had driven humanity to the brink of self-destruction was now threatening to sabotage their last chance at survival. The gardeners had observed civilizations make this choice before: advancement or extinction, cooperation or collapse. Earth's evaluation period was nearly over. In observatories around the world, astronomers reported the same phenomenon. A previously undetected object had appeared at the edge of the solar system. It wasn't a planet or asteroid. The object was artificial, massive, beyond comprehension, and moving with purpose toward Earth. Its estimated arrival time caused a chill to run through every scientist who calculated it. 47 days. The number that had appeared in dreams, visions, and technological glitches for months was revealed as a deadline. Not an invasion schedule, but a departure time. The gardeners were leaving, taking their offer of partnership with them. Humanity would have to choose: evolve beyond its destructive patterns and join the galactic community, or remain isolated on a dying world. For Maya and the thousands like her, the choice had already been made. She could feel the collective knowledge flowing through the network. Technologies that could reverse environmental damage, social structures that had eliminated war on dozens of worlds, scientific principles that made faster-than-light travel possible. All of it freely offered, waiting only for humanity to demonstrate it was ready to receive such gifts responsibly. But readiness couldn't be forced. It had to be chosen. The signs were everywhere now for those who knew how to look. The aurora patterns that spelled out mathematical equations, the whale songs that incorporated alien harmonics, the children who drew pictures of beings they'd never seen but somehow knew, the technology glitches that weren't random but purposeful, gradually introducing concepts that human minds could barely grasp. Even the skeptics were beginning to notice. Government agencies that had spent decades denying extraterrestrial contact were quietly reaching out to contactees, desperate for information about what was coming. Military leaders who dismissed UFO reports as weather balloons and experimental aircraft were now studying the same footage with growing unease. The gardeners weren't hiding anymore because they didn't need to. Their work was nearly complete. They had planted the seeds of transformation throughout human society. Whether those seeds would grow into a new chapter of human evolution or wither in the soil of ignorance and fear was no longer their decision to make. Dr. Chen felt tears streaming down her face as she decoded the latest transmission. It wasn't a message of conquest or ultimatum. It was a love letter, a detailed expression of hope for humanity's potential, written by beings who had watched countless species stand at this same crossroads. Some had chosen wisdom and joined the vast community of conscious life that spanned the galaxy. Others had chosen isolation and eventual extinction. The gardeners were gardeners because they planted possibilities, not certainties. They could provide the tools and knowledge, but each species had to choose for itself whether to use them. The countdown continued. 44 days and 17 hours until the massive ship reached Earth's orbit. 44 days for humanity to decide whether it was ready to tend a garden that stretched across the stars, or whether it would remain forever trapped in the small plot of Earth it had always known. The invitation remained open. The choice was humanity's to make, and in observatories, laboratories, and living rooms around the world, people looked up at the night sky with new understanding, knowing that they were no longer alone, and that the universe was waiting to see what kind of gardeners they would choose to become. The message hit us simultaneously, not through our radios or any conventional means, but directly into our minds. It wasn't words exactly, more like pure understanding flooding our consciousness. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a fire hose of alien thought. We are the ones you call the gardeners. Your species stands at the threshold. Captain Harris gripped his controls so tightly his knuckles went white. Through our helmet comms, I could hear Rodriguez muttering prayers in Spanish. The formation of lights had grown larger, more complex, forming geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living mathematics against the star field. You have been observed. You have been measured. The time of choosing approaches. The thoughts weren't threatening, but they carried a weight that made my chest feel compressed, like the atmosphere itself had become denser. My instruments flickered wildly before stabilizing on readings that shouldn't have been possible. We were still flying in formation, but according to the altimeter, we were somehow at negative altitude. Your world changes too quickly now. The balance your ancestors maintained has been broken. The oceans warm, the ice retreats, the forests burn. Your own kind war while the planet dies beneath them. Images flooded my mind then, not my own memories, but something else entirely. I saw Earth from impossible heights, watching centuries pass in moments. Vast forests being cleared in seconds. Oceans rising and falling like breathing. Cities spreading like infection across green landscapes. It was beautiful and terrible and completely overwhelming. We have watched species face this moment before. Some choose wisdom. Others choose extinction. Through the comm system, I heard Morales choking back what sounded like sobs. The images were affecting all of us, showing us our world through eyes that had seen countless others. Some planets flourished, their inhabitants learning to live in harmony with their environment and each other. Others became barren rocks floating in the void. Their civilizations collapsed under the weight of their own short-sightedness. Your leaders know of us. They have known for decades, but they fear what acknowledgement would mean. They prefer the illusion of control to the reality of cooperation. The formation of lights began to move then, not away from us, but around us, creating a slowly rotating sphere with our jets at the center. My engine readings showed impossible efficiency levels, as if something was supplementing our fuel systems. We weren't burning jet fuel anymore. We were riding on something else entirely. Some among your kind are ready. They dream of us. They sense the changes coming. They understand that isolation is no longer possible in a universe teeming with consciousness. Harris finally found his voice. "What do you want from us?" The response came immediately, not just to him but to all of us, layered with emotions that human language couldn't adequately express. There was sadness there, and hope, and something that might have been love, but vast and impersonal like the love a gardener might feel for an entire ecosystem. We want nothing. We offer everything. Knowledge that could heal your world. Technologies that could feed your hungry. Wisdom gathered from 1,000 successful civilizations. But first, your species must choose to join the community of worlds, not as subjects, but as partners. I watched my fuel gauge, which should have been dropping steadily, remain completely stable. Whatever was happening to our jets, we could apparently stay airborne indefinitely. The thought should have been reassuring, but instead it drove home just how far beyond our understanding this situation had become. The choice cannot be made by your leaders alone. It must come from your people, and your people must understand what they are choosing: isolation and eventual extinction, or cooperation and a future among the stars. "Why us?" Rodriguez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because you fly among the stars already, even if you do not yet travel between them. Because you have seen the curvature of your world and understand its fragility. Because you serve something larger than yourselves, even if that service is sometimes misguided. You are bridges between the earth and the sky." The lights began to pulse in unison, and I felt something changing in my mind, like doors opening in rooms I didn't know existed. Suddenly, I could perceive things differently, see connections I'd never noticed before. The way air flowed over my jet's wings wasn't just physics anymore. It was part of a vast dance of forces that connected everything from the smallest atom to the largest galaxy. We leave you now with a gift and a burden. The gift is understanding. The burden is choice. What you do with both will determine not just your own futures, but the future of your entire species. The sphere of lights began to expand, moving away from us in all directions until they became indistinguishable from stars. My instrument snapped back to normal readings, showing our correct altitude, speed, and fuel consumption. But something fundamental had changed. I could feel it in the way the air moved around my aircraft, in the way the stars looked different, more alive somehow. We flew back to base in complete silence, each of us processing what had happened in our own way. During debriefing, we told them everything, knowing it would be classified and buried. But that wasn't the point anymore. The point was that we knew, and through us, others would know. The official report classified the incident as a mass hallucination caused by equipment malfunction and oxygen deprivation. But in the weeks that followed, I started noticing things. Other pilots reporting similar encounters. Scientists publishing papers about atmospheric anomalies that didn't quite make sense. Environmental activists speaking with a new urgency, as if they'd received some kind of revelation. The dreams started a month later. Not nightmares, but visions of possible futures. Some showed a world transformed, where cities floated among the clouds and deserts bloomed with engineered ecosystems. Others showed empty continents under alien skies, where nothing moved except the wind through abandoned ruins. I realized the gardeners hadn't just been talking to us that night. They'd been talking through us, planting seeds of understanding that would grow and spread in ways we couldn't predict or control. Every person we told the story to, even the ones who didn't believe it, carried some fragment of that cosmic perspective forward into their own lives. The choice they spoke of wasn't some grand political decision to be made in boardrooms or parliament buildings. It was happening every day, in every decision made by every person who'd been touched by their message. The question wasn't whether humanity would choose to join the galactic community, but whether enough individuals would choose wisdom over fear, cooperation over competition, long-term thinking over short-term gain. Sometimes, when I'm flying alone at night, I look up at the stars and wonder if they're still watching, still waiting to see what we'll choose. The gift they gave us was perspective. The burden was knowing that with that perspective comes responsibility. We are the bridges between earth and sky, and the future of both depends on the choices we make in the space between them. The countdown had been embedded in our consciousness for weeks now. 47 days. The number appeared everywhere, in dreams, in the static between radio stations, in the way shadows fell across empty fields. Those who had been contacted knew. The rest of the world remained blissfully unaware that humanity was approaching its final examination. I was working late at the observatory when the first mass sighting occurred. It wasn't the usual isolated encounter reported by a single witness. This time, entire cities looked up to see them. The craft appeared simultaneously over major population centers across 6 continents. Not hiding anymore, not subtle. The footage spread across social media faster than authorities could contain it. Thousands of identical videos from different angles, all showing the same thing. Enormous crystalline structures hovering motionless above skylines, their surfaces reflecting starlight in patterns that seemed almost musical. No sound, no movement, just presence. That's when the transmissions began. Every screen, every device capable of receiving a signal, displayed the same image. A vast chamber filled with representatives from countless worlds. The gardeners weren't alone. They were part of something larger, a collective of civilizations that had passed through this same threshold eons ago. The message was simple and terrifying in its finality. Humanity had reached a critical juncture. Our technological advancement had outpaced our spiritual evolution, creating an imbalance that threatened not just our own survival, but the stability of consciousness itself across multiple dimensions. The choice was being offered one final time, but now on a global scale. Accept guidance and join the galactic community, or remain isolated and face the natural consequences of our destructive trajectory. The gardeners had been trying to prepare us gradually, working through individual contacts, hoping to create enough awakened minds to tip the balance. But time was running out. Dr. Sarah Chen, a quantum physicist from MIT, was among the first to understand what was really happening. She'd been having the dreams for months. Visions of collapsing ecological systems, wars over dwindling resources, and the eventual extinction of human consciousness. But she'd also seen the alternative. Cities that grew like living organisms. Technology that healed rather than harmed, and human potential expanded beyond anything we'd imagined. "They're not here to save us," she explained during an emergency broadcast that somehow reached every device on Earth simultaneously. "They're here to offer us the tools to save ourselves, but we have to choose it collectively, consciously and soon." The global reaction was predictably chaotic. Governments demanded explanations they couldn't provide. Religious leaders struggled to reconcile their doctrines with the reality of benevolent cosmic intervention. Scientists raced to understand technology that operated on principles beyond current human comprehension. But among ordinary people, something remarkable began happening. The fear that initially gripped the world slowly transformed into something else, a collective awakening to possibilities they'd never considered. Communities that had been divided by politics, race, and ideology found themselves working together, driven by an inexplicable sense of unity. The gardeners had spent decades planting seeds of consciousness through their individual contacts. Now, those seeds were germinating simultaneously across the globe. People who had never experienced direct contact suddenly found themselves understanding concepts that had previously been beyond human comprehension. The barriers between minds were thinning. Maria Santos, a teacher from Sao Paulo, described waking up one morning with complete knowledge of sustainable agricultural techniques that could feed millions while regenerating damaged soil. James Okafor, an engineer from Lagos, suddenly understood how to build energy systems that worked in harmony with natural electromagnetic fields rather than fighting against them. Across the world, similar awakenings were occurring. Not supernatural powers, but expansions of human potential that had always existed but remained dormant. The gardeners weren't giving humanity new abilities. They were helping us remember what we'd forgotten. The traditional power structures began to crumble as ordinary people demonstrated capabilities that made existing institutions obsolete. Why fight wars over oil when consciousness itself could be harnessed as an energy source? Why maintain artificial scarcity when collaborative networks could efficiently distribute resources? But the transformation wasn't without resistance. Those who profited from humanity's limitations fought desperately to maintain the status quo. Military forces were mobilized against the peaceful gatherings that spontaneously formed around the hovering craft. Media campaigns spread fear about alien mind control and the loss of human autonomy. Yet something had fundamentally shifted in human consciousness. The lies that had once divided us seemed transparently hollow. The artificial conflicts that had consumed our energy for centuries lost their power to motivate. People simply stopped participating in systems that no longer served life. The gardeners watched from their crystalline ships as humanity wrestled with its choice. They couldn't intervene directly. That would violate the fundamental principle of conscious evolution. The decision had to come from within, from the collective will of human consciousness itself. With 30 days remaining, the first major breakthrough occurred. The children led the way, their minds less constrained by limiting beliefs. Playgrounds around the world became laboratories of expanded awareness, as young minds naturally adapted to the new possibilities. They demonstrated telepathic communication, healing through focused intention, and the ability to perceive energy patterns invisible to conventional senses. Adults watched in wonder as their children casually displayed abilities that science had declared impossible. The cognitive dissonance became too great to maintain. Either their children were somehow deluded, or everything they'd been taught about human potential was wrong. The choice became easier when framed not as submission to alien authority, but as graduation to humanity's next evolutionary stage. The gardeners weren't asking humans to become something foreign. They were inviting us to become more fully ourselves. With 20 days remaining, the first cities began transforming. Architecture that had stood for centuries started shifting, guided by collective human intention channeled through gardener technology. Buildings became living systems that purified air and water while providing shelter. Transportation networks evolved into flowing energy streams that moved people and goods without pollution or waste. The changes weren't imposed from above. They emerged from below, from the shared vision of communities working together. The gardeners provided the tools, but humans chose how to use them. Not everyone embraced the transformation. Pockets of resistance formed around the globe, clinging to familiar patterns even as those patterns led toward collapse. The gardeners made it clear that they wouldn't force anyone to evolve. Those who chose to remain in the old paradigm could do so, but they would have to do so without the support systems that had sustained human civilization. With 10 days remaining, the choice crystallized into its final form. Humanity could take the step into cosmic consciousness, joining a community of evolved civilizations, or remain isolated on a planet increasingly unable to support life as they knew it. The gardeners had shown them the path, but they couldn't walk it for us. In just over a week, they would depart, leaving humanity to face the consequences of whatever choice emerged from our collective consciousness. The real invasion, it turned out, had never been about conquest. It had been about awakening, an invitation to remember who we really were and what we were capable of becoming. The question was whether enough of humanity would accept that invitation before the window of opportunity closed forever. As the final countdown began, people around the world looked up at the crystalline ships and felt not fear, but anticipation. The greatest adventure in human history was about to begin, one way or another. Part 9. The signal grows stronger. The signs were becoming impossible to ignore. What had started as isolated incidents, the strange lights in forests, the humming sounds in empty fields, the circles burned into grass, was evolving into something far more coordinated. Reports poured in from every continent, sharing eerily similar details that painted a picture of methodical preparation. Dr. Sarah Chen sat in her laboratory at MIT, surrounded by printouts and digital displays showing electromagnetic readings from around the globe. As one of the world's leading experts in atmospheric physics, she'd been contacted by governments, universities, and research institutions, all reporting the same phenomenon: massive spikes in electromagnetic activity that followed no known pattern of natural occurrence. "Look at this," she said to her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, pointing to a screen filled with oscillating waves. "These aren't random bursts, they're pulses, deliberate, timed, almost like—" She paused, struggling to find the right words. "Like communication," Marcus finished. He'd been studying the data for weeks, and the conclusion was inescapable. But the frequency is unlike anything we've ever detected from human technology. The signals weren't just electromagnetic. Reports were flooding in from radio telescopes, seismic stations, and even amateur astronomers about coordinated phenomena. In Chile, the ALMA Observatory recorded strange harmonics in space. In Japan, seismologists detected rhythmic vibrations deep underground that matched no known geological activity. In Australia, marine biologists reported that whale migration patterns had suddenly shifted, as if the creatures were responding to some unheard call. But it wasn't just the scientific community taking notice. Social media platforms buzzed with videos and photos that defied explanation. A farmer in Kansas posted footage of his entire herd of cattle standing in perfect formation, all facing the same direction toward an empty field. A park ranger in Yellowstone documented how every bird in a 50-mile radius had gone silent for exactly 47 minutes. A commercial pilot flying over the Pacific captured video of lights beneath the ocean surface, arranged in geometric patterns too precise to be natural. The pattern was becoming clear to those who looked closely enough. The phenomena weren't random. They were coordinated, purposeful, and growing stronger by the day. In a small town in Vermont, librarian Ellen Morrison had become an unofficial clearinghouse for local reports. What had started as a few strange stories shared over coffee had grown into a network of hundreds of people documenting experiences that traditional authorities dismissed or ignored. Her small library had transformed into a nerve center where farmers, teachers, mechanics, and retired professors gathered to share what they'd witnessed. "It's like they're testing our communication systems," said Tom Bradley, a former telecommunications engineer who'd been tracking signal interference across New England. "Every time there's an event, our phones, radios, and internet experience brief disruptions, not failures, modifications, as if something is learning how our technology works." Ellen nodded, remembering her own experience with the strange visitors at her chestnut cart. The way they'd seemed to read her thoughts, to understand her memories without words. "Maybe they're not just learning our technology," she suggested quietly. "Maybe they're learning us." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If these beings, whatever they were, had been observing humanity, studying our communications, our behavior patterns, our reactions to their presence, then the scattered incidents of the past months weren't random encounters. They were reconnaissance. Dr. Amelia Santos, a linguist from the local college, had been analyzing the patterns reported in the signals. "I've been looking at the electromagnetic pulses as if they were language," she explained, spreading her notes across one of the library tables. "The intervals, the frequencies, the repetitions, they follow mathematical progressions that suggest meaning, and more importantly, they're evolving. The signals from last month were simpler, more basic. The recent ones show increased complexity, as if the senders are growing more sophisticated in their attempts to communicate. Or as if they're getting closer to achieving their goal," added Marcus, who'd driven up from Boston after hearing about the informal research group. "My lab at MIT has been tracking these signals globally, and there's a definite acceleration pattern. Whatever they're building toward, it's approaching fast." The evidence was mounting that these weren't isolated incidents, but part of a larger, coordinated effort. The beings, the gardeners as some had begun calling them, weren't just visiting Earth. They were preparing for something significant. In research facilities around the world, scientists were reaching similar conclusions. At CERN in Switzerland, particle physicists detected anomalous readings in their equipment that corresponded exactly with reported sightings. In Antarctica, climatologists found that the mysterious structures discovered in the ice were emitting regular pulses that synced with the global electromagnetic patterns. Even in space, astronauts aboard the International Space Station reported seeing coordinated flashes of light in Earth's atmosphere that followed no known meteorological pattern. The signals weren't random, they were a network. Dr. Chen pulled up a global map on her computer, marking every location where significant electromagnetic activity had been recorded. The pattern that emerged made her breath catch. The points of activity formed a perfect geometric grid across the planet's surface, with major nodes positioned at key geographical and population centers. "They're not just communicating with each other," she whispered. "They're creating a grid, a network that covers the entire planet." The implications were staggering. If the gardeners had established communication nodes across Earth, they possessed a level of technological sophistication that dwarfed human capabilities. But more than that, it suggested they were preparing for something that required global coordination. Reports from contactees, those who'd had direct encounters with the beings, began to share common elements that supported this theory. Many described receiving mental impressions of vast networks of consciousness, of connections spanning not just Earth, but reaching out into the cosmos. They spoke of feeling part of something larger, of sensing the presence of countless other minds working in harmony toward a shared purpose. Maria Santos, the single mother who'd agreed to become a host for the alien consciousness, found herself at the center of this growing network. The presence in her mind had grown stronger, more articulate, and through her, it began reaching out to others who'd had similar experiences. She discovered she could sense other contactees, feeling their presence like distant lights in her consciousness. "They're not invading us," she explained to a gathering of contactees in Phoenix. "They're inviting us to join something. The network isn't just their technology, it's their society. They exist as connected consciousnesses, and they're offering us the chance to become part of that connection." But the choice, she emphasized, had to be made freely. The beings wouldn't force humanity into their network. Instead, they were demonstrating its benefits, showing how consciousness could be expanded, how problems could be solved through collective thinking, how the isolation and conflict that plagued human society could be overcome through shared understanding. The signals were growing stronger because more humans were choosing to join the network. Each new connection strengthened the whole, creating a feedback loop that amplified the being's ability to communicate and coordinate. The electromagnetic pulses weren't just communication. They were the nervous system of a growing collective consciousness that spanned the globe. As the network expanded, those connected to it began to understand the true scope of what the gardeners were offering. Through shared consciousness, they glimpsed vast civilizations among the stars, worlds where beings had overcome the challenges that still plagued Earth. Environmental destruction, war, inequality, the loneliness of isolated minds. But they also sensed the urgency behind the gardeners' mission. Earth was approaching a critical juncture, a point where humanity would either transcend its current limitations or face the consequences of its destructive patterns. The network was growing stronger because time was running short. The artificial object at the edge of the solar system, now clearly visible to major telescopes and officially acknowledged by space agencies, was indeed approaching. Its trajectory would bring it close to Earth in exactly 31 days, but those connected to the network understood it wasn't a weapon or invasion force. It was an ark, a vessel carrying representatives of the galactic community who would formally invite humanity to join the cosmic civilization. The choice would be humanity's to make: accept the invitation and gain access to technologies and wisdom that could solve Earth's problems, or reject it and continue on the current path toward ecological and social collapse. The gardeners wouldn't intervene by force. That wasn't their way. But they would only extend the invitation once. The signals were growing stronger because the network was preparing humanity for that choice. Through the expanded consciousness of those already connected, people around the world were beginning to understand what was at stake. The strange phenomena, the electromagnetic pulses, the coordinated events, all of it was designed to open human minds to possibilities beyond their current understanding. In 31 days, when the Ark arrived, humanity would need to give its answer. The network would serve as the conduit for that decision, allowing the collective consciousness of Earth to speak with one voice. But first, enough humans needed to be connected to make that choice meaningful. The signals grew stronger with each passing hour, each new mind that opened to the network, each human who chose connection over isolation. The gardeners were patient, but their patience had limits. In 31 days, Earth would either join the galactic community or be left to face its future alone. The invitation had been extended. The network was in place. The choice was humanity's to make. The reports started coming in from every corner of the globe. Scientists at observatories worldwide were picking up something unprecedented. Radio telescopes from Arecibo to Jodrell Bank detected coordinated signals emanating from deep space, all pointing toward a massive object moving through our solar system at impossible speeds. The thing was, this wasn't random cosmic debris or a rogue asteroid. This was artificial. This was controlled. And it was heading directly toward Earth. Dr. Sarah Chen had been monitoring deep space communications for over 2 decades, but nothing had prepared her for what she was seeing on her screens that morning. The signal patterns were unlike anything in their databases, yet somehow familiar. They matched fragments of transmissions her team had been tracking for months, the same mysterious frequencies that had been appearing during the worldwide encounters with luminous craft. "It's not just one object," she told her supervisor, her voice barely concealing her excitement and terror. "The readings suggest something massive. Ship-sized massive. Maybe city-sized." The data was undeniable. Something approximately 12 miles in diameter was decelerating as it approached Earth's orbital path. Its trajectory suggested it wasn't planning to pass by. It was planning to stop. Government agencies went into overdrive. Emergency meetings were called at the highest levels. Military installations worldwide were placed on high alert, though everyone knew conventional weapons would be useless against something of this magnitude. The object, which media outlets had begun calling the visitor, was still weeks away, but its presence could already be felt. That's when the dreams intensified. People across the globe reported the same recurring visions. They saw themselves standing in vast crystalline chambers filled with beings of light. They experienced memories that weren't their own, glimpses of civilizations that had faced similar moments of choice throughout galactic history. Some worlds had embraced the invitation and joined something greater. Others had rejected it and faced consequences too terrible to fully comprehend. Maria Santos, a teacher from Sao Paulo, woke up one morning with knowledge she'd never possessed. She understood complex mathematical equations that described interdimensional travel. She could visualize the structure of space-time in ways that would have taken her years of advanced study to grasp. When she tried to explain it to her husband, the words came out in a language neither of them recognized, yet somehow she knew exactly what she was saying. Similar cases emerged worldwide. A mechanic in Detroit suddenly began sketching blueprints for energy systems that operated on principles beyond current human understanding. A farmer in rural India found herself speaking in harmonious tones that seemed to resonate with the very air around her, causing plants to grow faster and stronger. Children in schools across continents began drawing identical symbols without ever having seen them before. The gardeners weren't just approaching Earth. They were preparing humanity for contact. Dr. Chen's team detected changes in the electromagnetic field surrounding the planet. The aurora borealis began appearing at latitudes where it had never been seen before, painting the sky in colors that didn't exist in the normal spectrum. Sensitive individuals reported feeling a constant low-frequency vibration, as if the Earth itself was humming in anticipation. Religious leaders struggled to provide guidance to their increasingly anxious congregations. Some proclaimed the arrival as a divine sign, a fulfillment of ancient prophecies. Others warned of deception, urging their followers to resist whatever was coming. Scientists attempted to maintain rational discourse, but even they couldn't explain the growing number of phenomena that defied conventional understanding. The most disturbing reports came from those who had experienced direct contact with the gardeners during the earlier wave of encounters. They spoke of an overwhelming sense of urgency, images flooding their minds of Earth at a crossroads. In their visions, they saw two potential futures. In one, humanity joined a vast network of civilizations, sharing knowledge and wisdom across the stars, becoming part of something magnificent and eternal. In the other, they saw Earth as it would be if humanity failed this test, a barren world stripped of its potential, left to struggle alone in cosmic isolation. The choice, they all insisted, wasn't being imposed from outside. The gardeners weren't conquerors or saviors. They were gardeners in the truest sense, tending to the growth of consciousness throughout the galaxy. They had identified Earth as a world approaching the threshold of true awareness, but the final step had to be taken willingly. Humanity had to choose to evolve. Government disclosure came in carefully measured stages. First, acknowledgement that anomalous objects had been detected. Then, admission that these objects showed signs of artificial construction. Finally, the revelation that contact had already been made with representatives of what appeared to be an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. The public reaction was a mixture of panic, wonder, and surprising acceptance. Decades of science fiction had prepared many people for this possibility, but the reality was far more complex than any movie or novel had imagined. This wasn't about invasion or conquest. It was about graduation. As the massive vessel drew closer, its presence became impossible to ignore. Amateur astronomers could track it with backyard telescopes. Its surface appeared to shift and flow like liquid metal, occasionally displaying patterns of light that seemed to respond to observation. When multiple people looked at it simultaneously from different locations on Earth, they reported seeing the same symbols appearing on its hull, as if it was actively communicating with anyone who paid attention. The most profound changes occurred in the realm of human consciousness itself. People reported feeling more connected to each other, more aware of the intricate relationships that bound all life together. Environmental activists found their messages resonating with audiences who had previously been indifferent. Scientists working on separate projects began making breakthrough discoveries at an unprecedented rate, as if barriers to understanding were systematically being removed. Dr. Chen realized that the approaching vessel wasn't just a ship. It was a library, a university, a bridge between worlds. The gardeners had spent millennia collecting knowledge and wisdom from civilizations across the galaxy. They were offering humanity access to this vast repository of understanding, but only if we proved ready to use it responsibly. The global meditation events began spontaneously. Without central organization or leadership, people worldwide began gathering at sunset to focus their thoughts on peace, unity, and preparation for contact. These gatherings grew from small groups to massive assemblies, numbering in the millions. Participants reported feeling connected not just to each other, but to something vast and ancient that had been watching over Earth's development for longer than human civilization had existed. Satellite imagery revealed geometric patterns appearing in crop fields, deserts, and even in the arrangements of clouds. These weren't the crude circles that had puzzled investigators for decades. These were complex mathematical formulas and star charts that seemed to be teaching humanity about the structure of the galaxy we were being invited to join. The most remarkable discovery came when linguists began analyzing the various symbols and sounds that contactees had been reporting. Despite emerging from different cultures and languages around the world, they all fit together into a coherent communication system. It was as if the gardeners had been gradually teaching humanity a universal language, preparing us for conversations with beings whose thoughts and experiences were far beyond our current understanding. As the vessel entered Earth's orbital space, it became clear that this was no ordinary first contact scenario. The gardeners had been part of humanity's story from the beginning, subtle influences that had guided our development while respecting our free will. Ancient texts from every culture contained references to beings of light who had occasionally appeared to offer guidance during crucial moments in human history. The difference now was that humanity had developed enough to be offered full partnership rather than mere guidance. The final transmission came not through radio telescopes or government communications, but directly into the consciousness of every human being on Earth simultaneously. It wasn't heard as words, but felt as understanding. A gentle presence that made itself known without force or demand. The message was simple. The garden is ready for new gardeners. Will you tend the stars with us? The choice belonged to humanity. The vessel would wait for an answer, but not indefinitely. In 31 days, it would either welcome Earth into the galactic community or depart, leaving humanity to find its own path among the stars. The gardeners had done everything they could to prepare us for this moment. What happened next would determine not just Earth's future, but the future of consciousness itself in our corner of the galaxy. The real invasion had never been about conquest. It had been about invitation, and humanity's response would echo through the cosmos for millennia to come. The messages started arriving without warning, scattered across every possible channel. Radio operators picking up transmissions in languages that didn't exist. Internet forums flooded with posts containing coordinates and timestamps. Emergency broadcast systems activating themselves, displaying symbols that seemed to shift when you looked directly at them. What made these communications different wasn't just their mysterious origin, it was their precision. Every message, regardless of format, contained the same core information: specific locations, exact times, and a simple instruction that appeared in whatever language the receiver understood best. Come alone, bring nothing, tell no one. The locations weren't random. Each coordinate pointed to places of historical significance, sites where unexplained events had occurred throughout human history. Stone circles, ancient observatories, locations where UFO sightings had been reported for decades, places where the boundary between our world and something else seemed thin. Those who received the messages described an overwhelming compulsion to respond. Not fear, not curiosity, but a deep knowing that this was important beyond comprehension. A feeling that humanity's future hinged on these carefully orchestrated meetings. Dr. Sarah Chen was monitoring deep space communications when her equipment began receiving structured signals from coordinates that shouldn't exist. The transmissions weren't coming from any known satellite or space agency. They were originating from points in space where nothing should be broadcasting, yet the signals were stronger and clearer than anything terrestrial. The pattern was unlike anything we'd encountered, she explained. Mathematical sequences that demonstrated knowledge of concepts we're only beginning to understand. But embedded within the data were personal details, information about my childhood, my education, my work. They knew exactly who they were talking to. The message directed her to a remote observatory in Chile, one she'd worked at years earlier during her graduate studies. The timestamp was precise, 3 days from when she received the transmission, at exactly 3:33 a.m. local time. Similar invitations were being extended worldwide. A farmer in Kansas received coordinates through his radio that led to a field where crop circles had appeared decades earlier. A lighthouse keeper in Scotland found a message carved into the lens housing, directing him to standing stones on a nearby island. A subway worker in Tokyo discovered symbols chalked onto tunnel walls, guiding him to a shrine where unexplained lights had been reported for generations. Each person faced the same choice: ignore the message and continue with their normal life, or follow instructions that made no logical sense but felt undeniably important. Those who chose to respond found themselves part of something larger than they'd imagined. The meetings weren't random encounters with unknown beings. They were carefully planned exchanges. Information was shared both ways. Questions that had puzzled humanity for centuries were answered, while details about human culture, emotion, and potential were collected with scientific precision. The beings conducting these exchanges appeared different to each person, but their message was consistent. Humanity had reached a critical juncture. The choices made in the coming months would determine whether Earth joined a vast community of worlds or remained isolated, struggling with problems that had already been solved by countless other civilizations. But this wasn't a demand or ultimatum. It was an offer, extended with patience and respect for human autonomy. The visitors had been observing for generations, watching humanity develop, waiting for the right moment when contact could occur without causing panic or disruption. They showed me images, Dr. Chen recalled. Cities that floated among the stars, technologies that could heal our planet, knowledge that could solve problems we don't even know we have. But they made it clear that these gifts come with responsibility. We have to prove we're ready for them. The exchanges always ended the same way. Each person was given a choice: return to their normal life with memories intact but sworn to secrecy until humanity was ready, or become part of a growing network of individuals preparing for formal contact. Those who chose to join the network found themselves connected to others who'd had similar experiences, forming a quiet community dedicated to helping humanity navigate the transition ahead. The timeline was flexible but not infinite. Environmental pressures, social tensions, and technological developments were accelerating toward a point where intervention might become necessary rather than voluntary. The beings preferred cooperation to rescue, partnership to dependency, but they wouldn't allow a promising species to destroy itself through ignorance when solutions were readily available. The communications continued, reaching more people each day. Scientists, artists, teachers, farmers, engineers, philosophers, leaders from every field and background. The selection criteria weren't based on fame or power, but on something deeper: the ability to process profound change without breaking, the wisdom to understand that contact with other worlds would fundamentally alter everything about human existence. Each message contained the same underlying truth: humanity wasn't alone, had never been alone, and the time for pretending otherwise was coming to an end. The only question was whether the transition would be guided by fear or curiosity, isolation or collaboration. The network grew quietly, its members returning to their normal lives while carrying knowledge that changed everything. They watched for signs, prepared for questions, and waited for the moment when secrecy would no longer be necessary. When humanity would be ready to take its place among the stars, not as children requiring protection, but as partners capable of contributing to something magnificent and vast. The messages were still arriving, but now they carried a new tone: less urgency, more anticipation. The preparation phase was nearly complete. Soon, the choice would be presented not to individuals, but to humanity as a whole. And everything would change. The messages started coming through our emergency broadcast systems at exactly 3:33 a.m. across every time zone simultaneously. Not through the internet, not through satellites, but through every radio, every television, every device capable of receiving a signal. The voice that emerged was calm, measured, and unmistakably not human, yet somehow familiar to anyone who had been paying attention. 47 days remain, it said simply. The choice approaches completion. I was working the overnight shift at the broadcasting station when it happened. One moment we were running our usual late-night programming. The next, every screen in the building displayed the same image: a vast, geometric pattern that seemed to shift and breathe, accompanied by coordinates that led to locations across the globe. The audio was crystal clear, cutting through static and interference like it wasn't bound by the same laws that governed our technology. We are the gardeners. We have walked among your dreams, whispered through your devices, and observed through your cameras. The time for subtlety has passed. The message lasted exactly 17 minutes. 17 minutes that changed everything. Because this wasn't just a transmission. It was a revelation. Every unexplained phenomenon, every strange encounter, every glitch and anomaly that people had been reporting for months suddenly had context. The flickering lights, the time gaps, the impossible objects in the sky, the voices in static. It had all been preparation for this moment. You have been tested not through conquest but through invitation. Your response to our presence has been documented, analyzed, and found adequate, but adequacy will not ensure survival. The coordinates led to 17 locations worldwide. Empty fields, remote forests, abandoned industrial sites, places where people had reported the strangest encounters. Within hours, despite government attempts to establish perimeters, thousands began gathering at these sites. They came carrying the artifacts, the photographs, the recordings, evidence of contact that had been dismissed as hoaxes or hallucinations. Sarah Chen was among the first to arrive at the coordinates in Nevada. She brought the crystalline fragment she'd found in her garden, the one that had been growing larger each day. "I knew this was coming," she told the news crews. "I could feel it in my mind, like a countdown I couldn't stop." Marcus Rodriguez drove 18 hours to reach the site in Montana, clutching the notebook filled with symbols he'd been compulsively drawing for weeks. "They're not symbols," he realized as he stood in the designated area. "They're instructions." Dr. Elena Vasquez abandoned her laboratory in Switzerland, taking the first flight to the coordinates in British Columbia. The samples she'd been studying, the ones that defied every law of physics, had begun resonating at a frequency that made her equipment sing. "The resonance is increasing," she explained to anyone who would listen. "Something is synchronizing." The gathered crowds weren't random. Each person who felt compelled to come had been touched by the phenomenon in some way. They'd seen the lights, heard the voices, experienced the time distortions, or found the objects. They were the ones who had responded with curiosity rather than fear, with openness rather than hostility. They were the bridge between worlds. "Your species stands at a convergence point," the voice continued during the second broadcast, which came exactly 24 hours after the first. "The path you have chosen through individual encounters has determined your collective readiness. Those who gather at the coordinates understand this instinctively." The governments of the world scrambled to respond. Emergency sessions were called at the United Nations. Military forces were mobilized. Scientists were consulted. But the gardeners had been thorough in their preparation. Every major world leader reported the same thing. Dreams where they stood in vast chambers of light, where beings of impossible beauty showed them visions of Earth's future. Two paths. One led to a world transformed, where humanity joined a vast network of civilizations spanning the galaxy, cities that floated among the clouds, technology that healed both the planet and its people, knowledge that unlocked the mysteries of consciousness itself. Disease, poverty, and environmental destruction became memories as humanity learned to work in harmony with forces beyond their current understanding. The other path showed a world alone, struggling with the same problems that had plagued it for millennia. Climate change accelerating beyond control, resources depleting, conflicts escalating as desperation grew. Not destruction by alien hands, but the slow collapse that comes from isolation and the inability to transcend limitation. "We do not conquer," the third broadcast explained. "We do not rule, we invite. But invitation requires acceptance, and acceptance requires transformation. The choice has always been yours." The phenomenon that had been building for months reached its crescendo. People worldwide reported shared dreams, synchronized visions, and a growing sense of connection not just to the gardeners, but to each other. The network that had been slowly establishing itself through electromagnetic signals and consciousness interfaces was becoming fully active. Dr. James Morrison, the astrophysicist who had first detected the artificial object approaching Earth, made a startling announcement. "It's not a ship," he told the assembled media. "It's a construct. A living technological organism that exists partially in our dimension and partially in others we can't perceive. It's not coming to Earth. It's opening a doorway. The object, now clearly visible in the night sky as a slowly shifting geometric form, pulsed with the same rhythm as the signals people had been receiving. Amateur radio operators discovered they could tune into frequencies that allowed them to hear what sounded like conversations in languages they didn't recognize but somehow understood. Children born in the months since the phenomenon began showed remarkable abilities. They could manipulate the strange objects that had been appearing, seemed to communicate without words, and drew pictures of places that didn't exist on Earth but felt familiar to anyone who looked at them. They weren't afraid of the changes coming. They were excited. These children, explained Dr. Patricia Huang, a developmental psychologist studying the phenomenon, they're not mutants or hybrids. They're what humans become when they're born into a connected universe. They're showing us our potential. The 17 gathering sites had become cities overnight. People from every corner of the world, every culture, every belief system, united by their shared experience of contact. They worked together with an efficiency that surprised sociologists and anthropologists. Language barriers seemed meaningless when communication could happen through shared understanding rather than words. The objects that had been appearing, the crystals, the metallic fragments, the geometric shapes, revealed their purpose. When brought together in sufficient quantities, they formed larger structures. Platforms that hummed with energy, interfaces that responded to touch and thought, communication devices that could reach across impossible distances. Whoa. We've been building a reception network, realized Dr. Vasquez as she watched the crystalline fragments from around the world combining into a massive, resonating structure. Every person who found an object, every person who experienced contact, we've been unconsciously constructing the infrastructure for whatever comes next. The world's religious leaders found themselves in an unprecedented position. The phenomenon didn't contradict faith so much as expand it. The beings that had been making contact spoke of consciousness as the fundamental force of the universe, of love and connection as the tools of creation, of the responsibility that comes with awareness. Ancient texts that had spoken of visitors from the heavens, of transformations and ascensions, suddenly carried new weight. "This isn't the end of the world," proclaimed Cardinal Martinez during an emergency address. "This is the beginning of a larger world. The question isn't whether we believe in them. The question is whether we're ready to believe in ourselves as part of something greater." But not everyone was ready for transformation. Fear movements spread almost as quickly as acceptance. Groups formed dedicated to resisting what they saw as an invasion of human autonomy. They pointed to the mind-reading abilities, the technological manipulations, the way the phenomenon seemed to bypass human consent. They argued that any species capable of such subtlety and power couldn't be trusted with humanity's future. The Gardeners acknowledged this resistance in their 4th broadcast. Fear is natural when consciousness expands beyond familiar boundaries. We do not require unanimous acceptance, but we require conscious choice. The path forward must be chosen with full understanding of what it means. The countdown continued. 47 days became 30, then 20, then 10. The artificial object in the sky grew larger and more complex, its geometric patterns shifting in ways that hurt to watch directly, but filled observers with a sense of profound anticipation. The gathering sites buzzed with activity as people worked together to complete structures they somehow knew how to build. Scientists studying the phenomenon made breakthrough after breakthrough. The technology being demonstrated operated on principles that unified quantum mechanics, consciousness, and what could only be called magic. The beings making contact existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. experiencing time and space in ways that allowed them to perceive entire civilizations as single living entities. They see us the way we see cells in our body, explained Dr. Morrison. Individual humans are like neurons in a planetary brain. They're offering to help that brain become conscious, to connect it to other conscious planets across the galaxy. But consciousness can't be forced. It has to be chosen. The choice was becoming clear. Humanity could remain as it was, isolated on a single world, struggling with problems that had no solutions within current limitations. Or it could accept transformation, become part of something vast and beautiful and terrifying and wonderful beyond current imagination. The final broadcasts began counting down not in days but in hours. The time for preparation was ending. The moment of decision was at hand. And around the world, in 17 locations where impossible structures hummed with otherworldly energy, people gathered to witness the culmination of the most important choice in human history. The gardeners had kept their promise. They had prepared humanity slowly, carefully, lovingly. They had provided evidence, demonstration, and explanation. They had shown both the benefits of acceptance and the consequences of refusal. The choice, as they had always said, belonged to humanity. But choice requires decision, and decision requires courage. And courage, they were about to discover, was perhaps the most human quality of all. The journey of the gardeners has reached its crescendo. Yet it is not an ending, it is a beginning. For 47 days, humanity has stood at the threshold between its isolated past and a cosmic future. The choice has been made, not through grand declarations or governmental treaties, but through the quiet awakening of individual consciousness across the globe. In research facilities and family kitchens, in classrooms and coffee shops, the invitation has been received. The patterns are unmistakable now, the synchronized dreams, the technological breakthroughs that arrive like gifts, the subtle shifts in perception that allow ordinary people to see beyond the veil of their daily existence. The gardener's patient cultivation of human awareness has reached fruition. Dr. Elena Vasquez stands in her observatory, no longer searching the skies for distant signals. The communication has evolved beyond radio waves and electromagnetic signatures. It flows through the collective consciousness of a species ready to acknowledge its place in a larger tapestry. The children she has studied, those born with an inexplicable understanding of concepts that should be foreign to human minds, are no longer anomalies. They are harbingers. The pilot who encountered the impossible craft over the Pacific, the farmer who found perfect circles in his field, the mother who accepted an alien presence to save her son, their stories are no longer isolated incidents. They are threads in a pattern that spans continents and cultures, weaving together the narrative of humanity's graduation from planetary adolescence to cosmic citizenship. The invitation was never about conquest or submission. It was about recognition. The recognition that consciousness is not bound by biology, that intelligence takes countless forms across the universe, and that the barriers between worlds exist only in the limitations of perception. The gardeners have waited millennia for this moment, tending to humanity's development with the patience of beings who measure time in geological epochs. As the final hours of the 47-day countdown expire, something fundamental shifts in the fabric of reality itself. It is not a dramatic transformation visible to news cameras or measurable by scientific instruments. It is quieter than that, more profound. It is the moment when humanity collectively realizes it is not alone, has never been alone, and never will be alone again. The contactees, the witnesses, the experiencers, they become the bridges. Their memories, once fragmented and dismissed, now serve as the foundation for a new understanding. The technology that appeared impossible becomes commonplace. The healing that seemed miraculous becomes medicine. The awareness that felt overwhelming becomes wisdom. The gardeners emerge not as invaders but as teachers, not as conquerors but as elder siblings in the cosmic family. Their ships, once hidden in the spaces between perception, now rest openly in fields and clearings, their presence no longer a secret to be hidden, but a reality to be embraced. They bring with them the accumulated knowledge of civilizations that have walked this path before, species that have transcended their planetary boundaries and joined the greater community of conscious beings. Yet the greatest gift they offer is not technology or knowledge. It is perspective. Through their eyes, humanity sees itself not as an isolated species struggling on a lonely planet, but as part of an infinite web of consciousness that spans galaxies. The problems that once seemed insurmountable, climate change, conflict, scarcity, are revealed to be the growing pains of a young civilization learning to think beyond the boundaries of its birth world. The transformation is not without its challenges. Not every human mind is ready for the expansion of reality that contact brings. Some retreat into denial, others into fear. But the majority, prepared by decades of gradual acclimation, step forward into the new paradigm with wonder rather than terror. The children lead the way, their minds unburdened by the rigid expectations of a reality that never included other worlds. In schools across the globe, new subjects emerge in the curriculum. Students learn not just the history of their own species, but the history of consciousness itself, how it arose on countless worlds, how it developed unique expressions of art and philosophy and science, how it eventually reached across the void to touch other minds and share in the grand conversation of existence. The economic systems that once drove scarcity and competition begin to transform as new technologies eliminate want and old paradigms of limitation give way to abundance. Energy becomes freely available through methods that work in harmony with natural systems rather than against them. Disease retreats before healing modalities that address not just the body, but the energetic patterns that underlie physical manifestation. But perhaps most significantly, humanity begins to understand its role as gardeners in training. Just as the beings who contacted them once received guidance from elder civilizations, humanity will one day serve as teachers and guides for species taking their first tentative steps toward cosmic awareness. The cycle of growth and guidance continues, an eternal dance of consciousness exploring itself through infinite expressions. The contactees find their purpose transformed. No longer isolated witnesses to impossible events, they become interpreters and ambassadors, helping their fellow humans navigate the transition from a one-world perspective to a universe-encompassing awareness. Their experiences, once sources of alienation and confusion, become invaluable resources for understanding the psychology of contact and the process of consciousness expansion. Dr. Vasquez's research takes on new dimensions as she works directly with the gardeners to develop protocols for peaceful contact with other emerging civilizations. The mother who sacrificed for her son finds herself counseling other parents whose children display the enhanced awareness that comes with humanity's evolutionary leap. The pilot's encounters with impossible aircraft become training exercises for a new generation of humans learning to navigate craft that respond to consciousness rather than mechanical controls. The 47 days were never a deadline. They were a gestation period. Humanity has been born into a larger reality, and like any birth, it marks not an ending but a beginning. The universe, vast and teeming with conscious life, opens its arms to welcome its newest member into the community of aware beings. As the first year of open contact concludes, children who have never known a world without the gardeners play games that span star systems and create art that expresses concepts their grandparents could never have imagined. The generation gap becomes a bridge rather than a chasm, with elders learning wonder from the young and youth gaining wisdom from their ancestors' hard-won experience of transformation. The invitation has been accepted, but more than that, it has been reciprocated. Humanity extends its own invitation to the cosmos, offering its unique perspective and gifts to the greater community. The species that once looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone was listening now adds its voice to the cosmic choir, singing its part in the infinite symphony of consciousness exploring itself through countless worlds and countless forms. The real alien invasion was never about beings from other worlds coming to Earth. It was about consciousness itself, infinite, creative, and endlessly curious, invading the limitations of isolated awareness and revealing the truth that has always been. We are all part of one magnificent, interconnected web of existence, and the universe has been waiting patiently for us to remember who we really are. Part 14. The countdown begins. We've explored the intricate tapestry of cosmic contact, from individual encounters to global phenomena, all pointing toward a singular truth that can no longer be denied. The gardeners, as they've come to be known, haven't been randomly appearing to scattered individuals across decades. Every sighting, every dream, every technological anomaly, every whispered message in the dark has been part of an elaborate, patient orchestration leading to this moment. The number 47 continues to surface with unsettling frequency. Researchers worldwide have documented its appearance in everything from radio frequencies to coordinates of sightings, from the duration of encounters to the spacing of mysterious crop formations. It's become clear that this isn't coincidence. It's a countdown, a cosmic clock, ticking toward an event that will fundamentally alter the trajectory of human civilization. Recent developments suggest we're approaching what contactees have begun calling the window, a critical period when the veil between worlds grows thin, when the barriers that have kept these beings at arm's length finally dissolve. Satellite data shows unusual electromagnetic patterns forming in the upper atmosphere. Deep space monitoring stations are detecting organized signals unlike anything in our databases. Perhaps most telling, the frequency of encounters has increased exponentially over the past 18 months. Those who've experienced direct contact describe a growing urgency in their communications. The messages are becoming clearer, more insistent. The time of choosing approaches, they say. Your species stands at the threshold. What was once cryptic has become explicit. Humanity faces an evolutionary crossroads, and the choice we make will echo through the cosmos for millennia to come. The gardeners present us with two paths. The first leads toward integration with a vast galactic community, access to technologies that could heal our dying planet, expand our consciousness beyond current limitations, and connect us to a network of civilizations spanning the stars. But this path requires fundamental changes to how we organize society, how we relate to each other and our environment, how we understand our place in the universe. The second path is isolation, maintaining our current trajectory while they withdraw their subtle guidance and protection. They've made it clear that this choice would lead to environmental collapse, social fragmentation, and ultimately extinction. Not through their intervention, but through the natural consequences of our own actions, accelerated by the absence of their stabilizing influence. But here's what makes this moment so extraordinary. They're not imposing this choice upon us. Despite their advanced capabilities, despite their obvious concern for our welfare, they refuse to override our free will. The decision must be ours, made collectively as a species, with full understanding of the consequences. Evidence suggests this isn't their first attempt at contact with an emerging civilization. Archaeological anomalies, ancient texts describing sky teachers, and genetic markers in our DNA all point to previous interventions throughout human history. But this time feels different. This time, we possess the technological sophistication and global communication networks necessary to make an informed, species-wide decision. The signs are accelerating. Witnesses report massive structures appearing in Earth's orbit, visible only through specialized equipment. Military installations worldwide are tracking objects that defy conventional physics. Perhaps most significantly, sensitive individuals are experiencing shared visions of possible futures. Some showing Earth as a garden world connected to the stars, others revealing a desolate planet, stripped of life. Those studying the pattern believe the window will open when the countdown reaches 0, when 47 becomes 1 and 1 becomes now. Current projections, based on the frequency and intensity of encounters, suggest this moment lies just beyond the horizon of our immediate future. The question that haunts every researcher, every contactee, every person who's glimpsed the truth behind the phenomenon is simple yet profound. When the moment comes, when the choice is finally laid bare before all humanity, what will we decide? The gardeners wait with infinite patience, their vast ships hidden just beyond our perception, ready to either welcome us into the cosmic community or withdraw forever into the depths of space. The countdown continues, each day bringing us closer to the moment when everything changes, when the real alien invasion finally begins, not as conquest, but as invitation, not as ending, but as the greatest beginning our species has ever known. The universe holds its breath. The choice approaches, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, ancient eyes watch with hope and sorrow, knowing that some doors, once closed, may never open again. The countdown has reached its final hours. 47 days have passed since the first coordinated signals appeared across our skies, since the shared visions began flooding social media, since everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe started to shift. What began as isolated incidents, strange lights, impossible encounters, whispered communications, has evolved into something far more significant. A pattern, a purpose, an invitation. The beings we've come to call the gardeners have been patient, methodical in their approach. They haven't arrived with weapons or demands. Instead, they've been planting seeds of awareness, opening minds, preparing us for a choice that will determine not just our immediate future, but the very trajectory of human consciousness itself. Tonight, as the final hours tick away, reports are flooding in from every corner of the globe. The aurora-like formations that have been appearing sporadically are now constant, painting the night sky in colors that don't exist in our spectrum. The shared dreams have intensified, millions of people worldwide experiencing the same visions of vast gardens among the stars, of worlds where consciousness flows freely between species, of technologies that work in harmony with the natural order rather than against it. The message has become crystal clear through these final transmissions. Humanity stands at a threshold. For too long, we've been isolated, cut off from the vast network of conscious life that spans the galaxy. The gardeners, along with countless other species, have been waiting for us to reach this moment, the point where we can choose to join the greater community of awakened worlds. But the choice must be ours. It must be free. It must be collective. The gardeners have shown us glimpses of what awaits, technologies that heal rather than harm, ways of living that enhance rather than deplete, forms of communication that transcend language and connect consciousness directly. They've revealed that many of our greatest challenges, climate change, resource scarcity, social division, have been solved by civilizations that came before us. The knowledge exists, the solutions are real, the invitation is genuine, yet they've also been clear about the alternative. If we choose isolation, If we reject this opportunity, they will respect that decision. They will withdraw, and the window will close, perhaps for generations, perhaps forever. Humanity will continue on its current path, facing our challenges alone, limited by our current understanding, bound by our current limitations. The signs are everywhere now. The structural formations that appeared in remote locations have begun to activate, revealing themselves as communication nodes, broadcasting the final invitation in every language, in every medium, reaching every corner of human civilization. The animals that gathered in strange patterns have become still, waiting. Even the weather seems to pause, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. Scientists, world leaders, and ordinary people alike are grappling with the same impossible reality. We are not alone. We never have been. And now we must decide what comes next. The evidence is undeniable. The choice is immediate. The stakes couldn't be higher. In research facilities and government buildings, in homes and schools and places of worship, the same conversations are happening. Families are gathering. Communities are meeting. Nations are consulting. Not to debate whether this is real, that question has been answered, but to decide how we respond. Some advocate caution, arguing that we need more time, more information, more certainty about what this partnership would mean. Others insist that this is the opportunity our species has been unconsciously preparing for throughout our entire history. Every scientific breakthrough, every moment of creative inspiration, every act of compassion building toward this moment of cosmic connection. The gardeners have shared fragments of their own history through the visions. How their world, too, once stood at this crossroads. How they chose connection over isolation, growth over stagnation, collaboration over competition. How that choice transformed not just their technology and their society, but their very understanding of what it means to be alive in an infinite universe. They've shown us the garden worlds, planets where conscious species work together to create environments of stunning beauty and impossible abundance. They've revealed the networks of communication that span light years, allowing thoughts and discoveries to flow freely between civilizations. They've offered glimpses of art forms that engage senses we don't yet know we have, of music that shapes reality itself, of stories that live and breathe and grow. But perhaps most importantly, they've shown us ourselves, humanity as seen from their perspective. Not the divided, struggling species we sometimes appear to be, but a young civilization on the verge of something magnificent. They see our creativity, our resilience, our capacity for love and growth and transformation. They see our potential to contribute something unique and valuable to the galactic community. The countdown continues, and with each passing hour the choice becomes more urgent. Around the world, people are reporting a strange sense of unity, as if the barriers between individual consciousness are beginning to thin. Social media is filled with stories of strangers helping each other, of old conflicts being set aside, of people reaching out across every imaginable divide. It's as if the mere possibility of joining something larger than ourselves is already beginning to transform us. The final transmission is expected at dawn, Greenwich Mean Time. A moment when the entire Earth will be positioned optimally within the communication network the gardeners have established. A moment when every human being, regardless of location or circumstance, will have the opportunity to participate in our species' most important decision. We don't yet know exactly how it will work, whether it will require some form of global vote, some collective expression of intent, or something entirely beyond our current understanding of choice and decision-making. But we know it will be inclusive. It will be fair. It will honor the complexity and diversity of human experience while seeking the common thread that connects us all. As these final hours unfold, one thing has become undeniably clear. We are living through the most significant moment in human history, not just because we've confirmed the existence of intelligent life beyond Earth, but because we've been invited to join it, to grow beyond our current limitations, to become part of something infinite and magnificent and full of possibilities we can barely imagine. The seeds the gardeners have been planting are beginning to sprout. The choice is before us. The future, our future, waits for our answer. The invitation has been extended. The garden gates stand open. All that remains is for humanity to decide whether we're ready to step through them and take our place among the stars. The countdown ends at dawn. Our new beginning, whatever form it takes, starts then. Part 16. The Convergence. Through these countless encounters, a pattern emerges that transcends individual experience. From the pharmacist's late-night visitors with their impossible prescriptions, to the violinist whose dreams became conduits for otherworldly melodies, to the security guard whose cameras captured forms that existed only in ultraviolet light. Each story reveals a fragment of something far greater than itself. The beings observed in these accounts share remarkable consistency. They communicate through thoughts rather than words, existing partially outside our normal perception of reality. They appear during liminal hours when our world grows thin, manifesting as translucent figures, geometric patterns of light, or distortions in space itself. Their presence disrupts our technology while simultaneously transcending it, leaving gaps in time and memory that suggest they operate by entirely different physical laws. What emerges most clearly is their patience. These entities aren't invaders in any conventional sense. They're observers, teachers, perhaps even gardeners tending to something they've cultivated across millennia. The treaty documents discovered by archaeologists speak of ancient agreements, of balance maintained between worlds. The lights that follow aircraft, the circles burned into farmland, the impossible objects hovering above water, all suggest ongoing contact, a conversation that has never truly ceased. The mother who became a bridge between species, the pilot who communicated through flares of light, the cancer patient who faced an impossible choice, their experiences point to selection criteria we barely comprehend. These beings seek specific qualities: empathy, consciousness, the ability to connect across the vast gulf between different forms of existence. They offer gifts and exact prices, extend invitations and respect rejections, all while maintaining the delicate pretense that first contact hasn't already occurred. The evidence accumulates in fragments scattered across decades. Radar operators tracking objects that move impossibly fast. Hikers finding perfectly arranged circles of crushed grass. Night workers encountering customers who pay an exact change but read minds instead of speaking. Each account stands alone, yet together they form a mosaic of ongoing contact, of a relationship between species that exists in the spaces between official acknowledgement and complete denial. The transformation has been gradual, almost imperceptible. The single mother feels thoughts that aren't entirely her own. The social media influencer becomes a conduit for messages she doesn't understand. The forest researcher discovers technology older than civilization itself. They're being changed slowly and carefully, prepared for something that approaches with the inevitability of seasons. The deadline approaches. Ancient agreements near their expiration. The patient observation gives way to more direct communication, more obvious signs. The lights grow brighter, the encounters more frequent, the invitations more urgent. The choice that has always existed, to join willingly or face the consequences of isolation, becomes impossible to ignore. Humanity stands at a threshold it has been approaching for generations. The stories shared here aren't isolated incidents, but symptoms of a transformation already underway. The beings who have watched from the shadows, who have guided and tested and prepared, are ready to step into the light. The question that remains isn't whether contact will occur, but whether we'll be ready to answer when they finally, openly call. The convergence isn't coming. It's here, in every unexplained light, every impossible encounter, every moment when reality bends just enough to reveal the vast intelligence watching from beyond the veil. The gardeners are ready to reveal their work. The bridge between worlds grows stronger with each passing night. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, ancient engines prepare for the next phase of a plan that began long before our species learned to look up at the sky and wonder if we were alone. We never were. We never will be. The only choice now is how we'll face what comes next.